talk about the scalar product or the dot product of two vectors. Let us consider we have two vectors, a vector and b vector, and the angle between the two vectors is theta. Then the dot product or the scalar product of the two vectors, these two vectors, is denoted by a vector dot b vector and defined as ab times cosine theta. A here is the magnitude of a vector and b is the magnitude of b vector, and this theta is the angle between a vector and b vector. So this is the way we define the dot product. The dot product of two vectors is a scalar quantity. It is just a number. It does not have any direction. It is just a scalar number. So now let me give you more idea about the dot. How do you calculate, in fact, the dot product if the two vectors are given? So again, let us assume this is a vector whose x component is a1, y component is a2, and g component is a3. I vector, j vector, and k vector here are the unit vectors. Remember, these are the unit vectors along x-axis, y-axis, and g-axis. And we also have a b vector. Now if we have to define a vector and b vector, then we just writing a vector dot b vector, and a is this vector here, dot, and this is the b vector. And the way we define it, we just multiply a1 times b1, just the I and I, because if you look, the way it is defined is I vector dot I vector, the magnitude of I vector is 1 times 1, and cosine the angle between them, and the angle between I vector and I vector is 0, so this one will be 1. Okay, but now if we do the vector multiplication of I vector dot j vector, then again the magnitude of I vector is 1, the magnitude of j vector is again 1, and the angle between them is 90 degree, and cosine 90 degree is 0. So the dot product of I vector and j vector will be exactly equal to 0. So how do we multiply? We just multiply, say, the like terms like I vector and I vector. So it will be a1 times b1. If you multiply a1 and this b2, then I vector dot j vector will be exactly equal to 0 because the angle between them is 0. So now we'll simply multiply a2, b2, a3, and b3, and then add them together. This is just a number now, so you can add them together. So here I have made a note here. This is I vector dot I vector or j vector dot j vector is equal to 1. And if we multiply, if we take the dot product of I vector with any other vectors, I vector dot j vector or I vector dot k vector or j vector dot k vector, it should be equal to 0 because the angle between them is 90 degree and cosine 90 degree is 0. So if the angle, so this is the way we just take the dot product of the two vectors. And now if you need to find out the angle, how do we find it out? Now let's say the angle between a vector and b vector is theta. Then by definition, the dot product is defined as ab cosine theta, as we discussed here. And a is the magnitude of a vector and b is the magnitude of b vector. So if we have to find out cosine theta, then we can simply take the dot product a vector dot b vector divided by the magnitude of a and magnitude of b vector. So if we need to find out this angle theta, first we need to take the dot product of the two vectors and then divide by the magnitude of each vector. So this is the scalar product of or dot product of two vectors. That's only the theoretical aspects. And in the next video I'll talk about or I'll give you an example how to take the dot product of two vectors. Thank you very much.